What's up, guys? It's your boy Zawolki back with some more of the Chris Watts murders. And today I definitely did take a moment to figure out if I wanted to make this video, just because I want to keep this obviously respectful, educational, and obviously like I said before, respectful towards Shanann, Bella, and Cece, and baby Nico, because we want to find the true justice for them. I don't feel like we're there, but a person had sent me this and stated that I should watch this because it definitely makes you more determined than ever to get the final justice for Shanann and the girls. So with that being said, we're going to take a look at the autopsy of Shanann Watts. We're not going to look at it. We're going to hear the podcast from Autopsy's podcast. Links will be down in the description for you guys to take a look at other episodes that may be on there. Again, this is for educational purposes only. This has no intent or any way, shape, or form to be disrespectful towards Shanann and her final rest, where she had been back in 2018. But I do want to make this very clear that if you guys cannot deal with imagery and so forth like that, I suggest you not watch this video, just for those people that are squeamish when it comes to hearing certain things. I definitely want to attend to everybody that can or cannot deal with this. I am on the fence about it when it comes to kids. It hurts me dearly. But I definitely want to know about this video. I want to make my honest reaction with you guys at home. And with that being said, before we go any further, if you guys could do me a solid favor, which thousands of you guys have been doing, hundreds of you guys have been doing, is continuously subscribe to the YouTube channel so we can get that justice for them, hopefully in the future, by watching and discussing and theorizing. I mean, somehow, some shape or form, we will get there and finally, hopefully, see success in NK's arrest and keeping Chris where he's at. A lot of people, there are some people that think that Chris is completely innocent, and I'm hoping that this video that we're about to watch, or the audio that we're about to hear, is going to is pretty much going to seal his fate in prison. So with that being said, let's get into this. Again, it's from the YouTube channel Autopsy Podcast. Go over there, give them some love. And with that being said, let's take a look at the video.
Rural northern Colorado, hilly and prairie-like. It's a state more popularly known for being the home of the beautiful and majestic Rockies, yet most of the eastern side of the state is fairly flat. And that's where we find ourselves, on a remote oil drilling site some 10 to 20 miles north of the small community of Rogan in Weld County. The work site doesn't contain much, save for its large, twin oil tanks. The rest of the surrounding area of the site is barren. It's nighttime, just after midnight, on August 16, 2018. The police have been led to this area in search of Mrs. Shanann Watts, 34 years old, and her two daughters, Bella Watts, age 4, and sister Celeste Watts, age 3. 3 days prior, on the afternoon of August 13th, a friend of Shanann came to their house after not being able to get a hold of anyone by phone, including Shanann's husband, Chris Watts. Neither Shanann and her girls nor Chris are home at this time. The friend had dropped Shanann off at the residence in the early AM this date after returning from a business trip and had not heard from her since, which was unusual. She contacts 911 with her suspicions. Chris arrives home later after police are already on scene, but his wife and daughters never show up. The following morning, August 14th, they are officially listed as missing, and a full-scale investigation into their whereabouts is launched. Chris is brought in for routine questioning. He agrees to a polygraph test and fails spectacularly.
Which NK should have.
Eventually, he confesses to murder and gives the location of the bodies, this job site. Authorities immediately travel to the area, now late into the night, and some 100 yards from the work area, in a shallow grave, they make their first discovery. The body of Mrs. Shanann Watts. Welcome to Part 1 of the Watts Family Murders. I'm your friendly death investigator. Let's do an autopsy. External examination. The body is received in a sealed body bag and clad in the following clothing items: a purple t-shirt, a pair of blue underwear, a black bra, a white metal piercing in the left nares, paper bags over each hand. Bagging hands is fairly standard procedure for investigations, especially for suspected homicides. The idea being that any trace evidence needs to be preserved, whether it be DNA or tissue under fingernails, or other evidence such as gunshot residue. Paper bags are used because paper breathes, compared to plastic bags, which don't breathe and can humidify to the point of possibly compromising evidence. Paper bags, of course, are not perfect. They can rip and tear far more easily, especially if they get wet. Still, they are the preferred way. The body is that of a well-developed, well-nourished, although decomposing Caucasian female whose appearance is generally consistent with the reported age of 34 years. The body measures approximately 67 inches long and weighs 144 pounds. The body exhibits mild to moderate decomposition consisting of generalized discoloration, bloating, and skin slippage. Something we've gone over before, but for new listeners, when it comes to decomposition, what many might believe to be moderate or latter stages actually tends to be early stages. Here we have bloating and skin slippage of the body. Around this time is when the foul odor of decomposition really starts to escalate. It's still really all early stages though. Mrs. Watts was found in a shallow grave after having been reported missing for approximately 3 days. The average temperature during this time in this part of Colorado had average highs in the upper 80s and average lows in the upper 50s, with an overall average somewhere in the 70s. Keep in mind, the more heat you have, the faster a body will decompose. The weather in Colorado never got to blistering temperatures, but it was consistently warm, and so the decomposition noted to Shanann's body is consistent. Approximately anyway. Again, as noted before, gauging decomposition takes in many factors, but in the end, there is no way to precisely measure how long a body has been deceased.
Yeah, there's people that want
the sclerae are dull, although white. There are no discernible scleral or conjunctival petechiae. The nose is midline, although dried. It does not grate upon palpation. The oral cavity contains natural dentition in good repair. There are no discernible buccal mucosal petechiae. The lips exhibit mild drying artifact. Petechiae. It's a term that is used over and over again in pathology. It denotes pinpoint-sized spots that are a result of tiny blood vessels bursting and hemorrhaging. They are associated with hypoxia, which is the deprivation of oxygen, and are usually described as reddish, brownish, or purplish. Most often they are seen on the face, in the whites of the eyes, on the inside of the eyelids, or even the inside of the lips. They can arise other places, but these areas are the most common and are some of the first places pathologists check in suspected homicide cases. It is something that is checked for on nearly all, if not all, autopsies, suspected homicide or not. And while it could be corroborating evidence for a number of issues, including choking, most often it is associated with strangulation. In the case of Mrs. Watts, the pathologist checks all the normal areas and finds nothing. There is a linear array of variably sized purple-black circular defects which extend from the inferior aspect of the chin along the jawline up the left aspect of the face towards the left temporal area. An interesting denotation here. The doctor chooses the term defects to describe a linear pattern of discoloration along the chin and jawline. Though it is not stated at this specific point,
Bruising.
if we go back to the evidence of injury section of the report, the doctor does mark this as, quote, possible patterned abrasions, unquote. So defect here seems to be a generic term for abnormal discoloration, with no specific cause or value given. And yet, it is still noted because it is not an otherwise normal finding. It is evidence, but decomposition unfortunately deteriorates it, leaving it not as compelling as it could be. The upper extremities are well developed and symmetrical, with all digits present. The fingernails are long and in good repair, although markedly dirty with sand and debris from the gravesite. The fingernails are pulled and retained as evidence by law enforcement. The lower extremities are well developed and symmetrical, with all digits present. The toenails are short and in good repair, with the exception of abundant sandy debris from the gravesite. The back and sacrum are unremarkable. Getting back to the hands now, which, again, were bagged. There is no notable evidence. No broken fingernails, nothing that appears blood or tissue-like under the nails. Still, the nails are clipped and retained as evidence, which is fairly standard procedure for many homicides of this nature.
But did they test them?
Otherwise, Mrs. Watts has no noted trauma to the rest of her external body. Her arms, legs, abdomen, and backside are all noted to be unremarkable. But there is one other remarkable finding externally, however. The external genitalia are largely normal adult female. However, the internal genitalia are protruding through the vaginal vault. This likely represents prolapse of the uterus due to pregnancy and postmortem artifact. Adjacent to the probable uterus is a largely degraded portion of tissue which is unfortunately covered in sandy debris from the gravesite. Upon further examination of this tissue, it is revealed to be a largely decomposed fetus.
Nico.
As mentioned, Mrs. Watts had 2 daughters, and at the time of her death, she was pregnant with her 3rd child, in her 2nd trimester. The doctor does not note the fetus's gender, as it is too decomposed for him to accurately dictate. According to personal documents from Shanann and Chris, it was a male, a baby brother for their girls. His remains were measured and retained for genetic analysis by the Colorado Bureau of Investigation. Internal examination. There are no abnormal fluid accumulations or adhesions in any of the body cavities. The epicardial surface is unremarkable. The coronary ostia are patent. The coronary arteries follow a right dominant distribution. Sectioning reveals no significant narrowing by atherosclerosis. There is no acute thrombosis. The endocardial surface and papillary muscles are unremarkable. The aorta has a normal, smooth, yellow, intimal surface. There is minimal atherosclerotic streaking noted. The major branches, including the celiac, superior and inferior mesenteric, and renal arteries, are widely patent. The inferior vena cava is unremarkable. We're starting with the cardiovascular system, which is normal. In fact, most of the internal examination reveals otherwise normal findings. As we've seen in previous episodes, noting negative evidence is just as important as positive findings. It lets us know the pathologists are checking everything thoroughly on their cases. And again, regardless of case type, ruling out foul play is part of every autopsy exam, and thus negative findings are quite essential. Thus, briefly, the lungs and respiratory system are fine. The spleen, liver, pancreas, intestines, stomach, kidneys are all normal. The spine, skull, and brain are free of injury and unremarkable. All of this adds up to Mrs. Watts being in good health and having no natural, discernible reason for death. Which brings us finally to the internal examination of her neck. The anterior musculature is smooth and dull. The epiglottis and hypopharynx are unremarkable. The hyoid bone and thyroid cartilage are intact. The laryngeal mucosa is unremarkable. There are no masses or aspirated material. The thyroid gland has symmetrical lobes and appears unremarkable. Yes, even more negative findings. Now we actually will get to significant neck evidence and findings momentarily, but again, the negatives must also be noted. And something else, while not completely relevant
At
here,
least they're
will
thorough.
definitely come up again in future episodes. The hyoid bone. It exists in the center part of the front of the neck, and, while fairly pliable, is often susceptible to injury. Specifically, when there is strangulation. But not always. As we see here, it is very much intact, with no noted injury. There are, in fact, many strangulations where the hyoid remains intact, and there are also cases where the hyoid is injured or fractured that aren't strangulations at all. I bring this up because oftentimes people see hyoid injuries and immediately believe a strangulation has occurred. Yes, it can be very compelling, corroborating evidence of strangulation, but not always, and there are a significant number of cases, such as with Mrs. Watts, where there are negative findings for the hyoid. And the broader point of this is simply never think in absolutes. Because if you believe that a fractured hyoid always means strangulation, then you leave yourself open to the reverse being always true. That is, no injured hyoid must mean there is no strangulation. As we'll now see, that isn't true at all. Probable bruising on the anterior subcutaneous neck tissue. Bruising of the superior aspect of the right sternocleidomastoid muscle. Bruising of the soft tissue and fascial tissue of the surface of the right thyroid cartilage. Bruising of the soft tissue associated with the right horn of the thyroid bone, which is intact. So, as mentioned in the past, anterior refers to the front of the body. So on the front of the neck, the subcutaneous tissue, which is the fatty tissue just below the skin, shows bruising. The bruising continues along the upper right sternocleidomastoid muscle. These are some of the outermost muscles in the neck, making them highly susceptible to injury. Keep in mind, this is also the approximate area of the hyoid, which had no injuries. Then we have bruising on and around the right side of the thyroid cartilage, which is just below the hyoid bone.
So this also rules out for those people that thought she had been hit on her head. She never had any bruising or hematoma or a hit on her head. She was just completely strangled.
Now is a good time to think back to the suspected pattern abrasions to the left side of Mrs. Watts' neck and face. Whatever the injuries are, they are superficial, meaning the trauma does not run much deeper than what is on the surface. The internal exam shows injuries on the right, however. If we assume a strangulation scenario, the more superficial external injuries could be consistent with one hand forcing Shanann's head still, while the other hand performs the more lethal injuries that resonate here below the surface. It's only a theory, of course. It connects the dots, but is by no means a definitive answer. And it's okay to theorize, as long as it's understood that that is all that it is.
True. That's why it's all we're doing is theorizing.
Due to Mrs. Watts' decomposed state, proper blood specimens could not be obtained for toxicology. Instead, blood squeezed from the spleen was used. That's exactly how it sounds. There is no blood that can actually be drawn from the spleen, so the spleen itself is squeezed. The organ, especially when decomposing, breaks down fairly easily. Think of it kind of like, say, an orange. You couldn't put a syringe in an orange and simply extract juice. But you can squeeze it, and as it breaks down, orange juice is created. Essentially the same for spleen blood. This blood was positive for a blood alcohol concentration of 0.128. That may sound relevant, but in actuality, not so much. Aside from spleen blood not being a proper substitute for real blood, when the body begins to decompose, the chemical breakdown actually produces some ethanol. The doctor simply lists the findings here, but has publicly stated that there is no relevance. Cause of death: asphyxiation due to manual strangulation. Manner: homicide.
So no chloroform
Report
was used.
date: September 26th, 2018. Signed, Michael A. Burson, M.D. When Chris Watts was first brought in for questioning, he pled innocence and ignorance. But pieces of the story did not add up.
They still don't add up.
Questions arose about possible rifts in the couple's marriage, which he shrugged off as nothing out of the ordinary, until a woman came forward during the investigation purporting to be Chris's girlfriend. Chris then admits his extramarital affairs and retracts his story. But already, other pieces have slipped as well. His truck, caught on a neighbor's security footage, is shown backed into his garage late into the night. More odd behavior. He now states he was planning a separation from Shanann, that there were issues, that he was seeing a different woman, and had been for nearly a month.
More than a month.
After his failed polygraph, he is pressed over and over again, and soon he is sat down one-on-one with his father. And during their conversation, for the first time, he admits to murdering his wife. Many want to believe that Mrs. Watts would not have allowed herself to be strangled without a fight. Her husband states that she did not put up much resistance, and the evidence appears to corroborate that. The telltale signs of defensive wounds simply are not here. Still, it's not impossible, and Mr. Watts' word at this point has proven unreliable.
Yeah, I can't believe a word he says.
But never mind the words for now, because what we do know is that Shanann Watts was strangled and buried in a shallow grave in almost the middle of nowhere. Nowhere here referred to officially as Survey 319 by Anadarko, the company for whom Chris worked.
And then demolished.
Chris claims at this point that he did what he did out of rage, that he killed his wife,
Premeditated.
and only his wife, because of what he alleges she did to their 2 daughters. Yet another story that would eventually be retracted as well.
You can't
But
believe
for
a
the
word he
moment,
says.
at least, we'll leave it right here where we began, and where there's still more yet to be discovered. At Survey 319.
So with that being said, guys, I got a little teary-eyed when it came to baby Nico. Just because I wish he would have been able to have a chance to live. I have big things with when it comes to children, that they deserve to live and grow and have fun, play with toys, grow up with their families, learn to love, learn to just be a child. And it's just upsetting that Bella and Cece and Nico didn't get the chance. Well, I mean, Cece and Bella did get a little chance, but just think what they would be today if they were still alive. How much they would have been able to had been enjoying vacations and school and summer vacation and Christmases, and they get none of that because of some stupidity of Chris, Nicole, possibly more with cover-ups. It just makes you want to So that being said, guys, comment your guys' thoughts down below for those that understood some of what he was saying when it came to certain muscles and stuff. I only know very little, but I do this for educational purposes because there was rumors about her being blunt force trauma. There is no blunt force trauma. People did speculate that there was chloroform involved. There's no chloroform involved. It looks like, and what he had stated, that it was asphyxiation with possibly one hand, while the other one was possibly holding her hands above her head. Is what I'm thinking. Is her hands were up here, and he just had, so she would not be able to fight. Hopefully she's up there and she's guiding us YouTubers to possibly helping finish this. I mean, that's saying a lot, but there's people out there that pretty much think that what we're doing here for the people that are doing this on YouTube are just bored, that we have nothing better to do with our lives and try to find out justice for people that need it. And that's just what I'm trying to do. So don't forget to hit the like button for the justice of these people that lost their lives. And subscribe for more. And again, like I said before, we're not done. This story is far from over, because there's more that we're going to take a look at when it comes to the company of Anadarko, the cover-up that is there with higher-ups when it comes to senators, governors, and so forth like that. So stick around, subscribe, and we'll see you guys in the next one. So please take care, keep it safe, and as always, keep nerding on. And we'll see you guys next time. Peace.